Dr. Erin Twyford has written an astonishingly honest and self-disclosing essay in the journal Critical Perspectives on Accounting. It puts into words what so many of us have been feeling, that our lifelong pursuit of truth and our aspiration as critical scholars to speak truth to power have been captured and neutralized by the metrification of academia, where impact factors and journal rankings matter more than the research itself. This, she says, is absurd. But what are we to do? We can protest, but like Sisyphus, our protest just pushes a boulder up the hill, only for it to crash back on us as soon as we think we're making a difference. How do we revolt against a system that absorbs and commodifies our revolt? I talked to Erin and learned how emotional awareness and personal relationships make it possible for her to speak the truth for its own sake. This is Podcast or Perish, a podcast about academic research and why it matters. My name is Cameron Graham, Professor of Accounting at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could I get you to introduce yourself?
Yes. Before I get into that, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country. So it's sort of practice in Australia to acknowledge that we are on unceded land of Indigenous people, and that today I am talking to you from Dharawal country, and I was born and raised on this country, and it's a privilege to acknowledge these lands as Dharawal, and I want to extend my respects to the Indigenous people, past and present, who are the custodians of that land. In talking about who I am, and again, this is going to have a bit of an Indigenous layering over it, and I think also speaks to what we'll be talking about later, Cam, but I am a wife and a mother and a friend and a daughter-in-law and a niece and an auntie and a sister-in-law, granddaughter. So there's lots of different parts of who I am, and I bring that wherever I go. And I'm guessing for the purposes of this podcast too that you'd like to know that I am a senior lecturer at the University of Wollongong here in Australia.
We can talk about your relatives if you want. We don't have to talk about accounting at all. Would you like to know about my granddaughters?
I would love to. Tell me.
I have three, and
Yeah.
One of them lives with us. We live in an extended family household here in Scarborough, Ontario, which is on Indigenous land, but there is a treaty in place for us to use this land. The Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, these are all First Nations that to whom this land, I hesitate to say belong, but they were here before we were. And I know the notion of owning land is not something that is particularly consistent with an Indigenous perspective. So I know that much. We have two other granddaughters, and in a few days I am going to be leaving Scarborough and going to Calgary to visit the youngest two granddaughters. And my eldest son and his family are there. So this is a time of my life when the relationships that I'm in are changing dramatically. As when you're next in line, right? It seems, and I'm talking about for dying, right? We have you and I have both written papers on elder care or aged care, so we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these things. But my parents are no longer alive. My wife's parents are no longer alive. If everything goes without a tragedy, we will be the next in line. And when that happens, we are turning over the reins, so to speak, to the next generation. So these are, my three sons who are now involved in that. And these are tremendous adjustments that we go through as we age, right? As we begin to reimagine ourselves. And the reason I'm going into this detail is not just because you asked, but I think it's profoundly related to the paper that we're going to be talking about. which is about imagining and reimagining our role in society as academics. And that has to be done in the context of who we are as people. So thank you for indulging me as I talk about my granddaughters.
I have so many more questions for you about that. That's the most interesting part of us, right? Like who we are, not just what we do. And I always enjoy when there's a keynote or a presenter who starts with a bit of context about who they are, how they got there, and why they're interested in that research, instead of just presenting as sort of this amorphous figure that has metrics attached to it that I'm not particularly interested in. Like I am interested in people. That's probably why we do the sort of research that we do in the first place. So it's probably not surprising, but yeah, maybe we can chat later about more about the granddaughters.
It's certainly why teaching is important to both of us.
Yeah.
Right. I know that you are an excellent teacher and have a strong reputation in that area. And I care deeply about teaching. And it's that immediate contact, immediate relationship with this other, right? Trying to have a human-to-human relationship with your students. It's extremely important.
Very. I think being relational is so central to who I am as an academic and a teacher and an educator and everything else. And relationships have to come first for me.
Well, why don't we talk then a little bit about how you do your research then? I was going to ask you about the particular topics that you've covered, and I know what they are. Our listeners, of course, won't. But maybe we can approach those kind of from the side by talking about the way that you go about doing your research and the relationships that are important to you in doing that research.
Sure. I think to do that, I have to do a little bit of foregrounding with my context. So I was supposed to be a medical doctor, and I did excellent on the empathy test, and I did terrible on the critical thinking, which was more like take this shape, move it this way, now what does it look like? So then I had to pivot, and I thought, okay, what's next? And then I tried law. So I started off doing a double degree in arts and law. About 6 weeks into the law degree, I thought, this isn't for me. I finished it, but I thought I'm going to have to do something else other than arts. And the arts was really for me to be able to do historical studies because I'd really enjoyed that at high school. And then I pivoted from the arts to commerce and found myself in accounting. And it wasn't until I came across Warwick Fennell's paper on accounting and the Holocaust that it was like this light bulb. And I thought, wow, accounting can do history stuff. And I'd always had a really strong interest in the Holocaust, in things like the Russian Revolution and things. So it then became, I guess, a pathway for me to pursue that interest while doing something that felt like I could be an accountant if I wanted to. Did a short stint with a Big Four as an intern in our capital city in Canberra. And I stayed with family during that time, and they had 2 young children, my niece and nephew. And I remember there being 3 days in a row where I never saw them. And I just thought, that's not the life that I want. So I started looking at academia, and that's kind of how we got here, and thinking about what sort of research I could do. Thought about, well, I want to do Holocaust research, even though I knew Warwick had done work there. That's where I wanted to go. And it was through that I think I keep looking at particularly vulnerable people. So, I did the PhD on the Holocaust, and then straight out of that, I formed a collaborative relationship with Fazana Tanima and Cinderella George. So Fazana and Cinderella and I met at a conference back in 2013. I think I had just put in my PhD proposal, and they were so lovely and welcoming, and I was so excited by what they were doing. And then we met again at the Apira conference in 2019, and we talked about how annoyed we were by the metrics, right? That we were sick of being sort of closed in on what we had to do, and we talked about the things we were actually really passionate about. And we thought, why don't we form a bit of a collaboration then, do the work we're interested in, and if we kind of have the 3 of us, we should be able to get more output so we can satisfy that element while doing what we want to do. And the first thing we kind of looked at was asylum seekers, and we had a bit of an agenda on that, and we're still kind of trying to get some work out about that. So that's how that became a thing. And then, of course, I think I mentioned we met in 2019, and then 2020 was COVID, right? In Australia, in particular, the hardest hit at first were the aged care facilities,
Yes.
the older people. And I remember specifically the former Prime Minister making a comment about how maybe families should just let them die rather than, shut down the economy. And it was shocking to me because these were literal words that I used for my Holocaust research: let them die, right? So to hear somebody in power saying that about older people during COVID, I felt like that was an area that I wanted to look at. And when I looked into it, there wasn't a huge amount of work being done on aged populations. So I think the way that my research has kind of streamed is definitely looking at more marginalized people, vulnerable people, and particularly how accounting systems further marginalize them, dehumanize them, and can even sort of enable violence against them, or justify that violence. So my work since then has very much been about looking at who do I really admire in the space, and I guess just reaching out to them and hoping that they'll take a bit of a chance. So I did that with Warwick, and we've done some work on some Holocaust things. Bazana and Cinderella, who I've worked with. I reached out to Jane Andrew at one point, who very surprisingly said yes, and now we have a few different projects happening, particularly in aged care. So for me, it was about looking at what I'm interested in and then looking at whose work do I admire, and I want to do things like they do. So I guess that in a nutshell, that's my
Hmm.
how I've gotten where I am.
Hmm. There is no end to the ways in which accounting insinuates itself into the fabric of life
Mm.
and the
Mm.
conduct of power. And this means that if you study accounting, you can study anything
Yeah.
and anything that happened at any time,
Hmm.
because accounting leaves records.
Yes.
So this is one of the beauties of being an accounting researcher for me, is being able to look at anything and realize that there are people who know far, far more about that topic than I ever will,
Hmm.
but they know usually very little about accounting, and
Yeah.
I can contribute something to the conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, and some of the age work stuff has happened that way as well. So connecting with health experts, public health experts, political economists, it's really interesting to hear these different points of view, and to share as well. So they share their research and their knowledge with me, and I share, for most of them, the idea of even a critical accounting stream
Mm-hmm.
where, it's not just numbers and things. And the amount of times, I meet people in the corridor or something, and they'll start talking about their research and go, oh, you wouldn't care about that because it's not quantitative. I'm like, actually, I don't look at numbers at all, really.
No, no, but there is this tendency, as you've alluded to, in certainly in the academy, to try to convert these qualitative things into numbers and to use
Mhm.
those numbers to represent reality. So that is something fundamental to the thing we're studying.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your engagement with this notion of the word critical, because this, will turn specifically to the paper, but when did you begin to when did you begin to self-identify as a critical scholar?
Oh, when did I? Do you know, it was probably during my honours year. So my honours project was quite I would say, mainstream type approach. And I got introduced to the work of Michael Gaffigan, who, of course, has a very strong relationship with the University of Wollongong. Um, and and he kind of introduced me to this notion of critical work. And then that just became the work that I was interested in and started looking at. Um, and I don't know, maybe I adopted it before I should have. But the other thing that I think really drew me towards it was we had Ed Arrington come to the university, and he was such a enigmatic person. And I think looking at his work and being exposed to his ideas, um, And then of course the wife on tour paper and things like that. So there's lots of, I guess, little bits that mosaicked into becoming this identity of critical. But for me, I think it's mainly about pushing back against certain things. And I think emancipation has to be central, whether or not, that's a major emancipation or the micro emancipations that I talk about in the paper. I think it's the idea that things can be better, that they should be better, and that we need to call things out wholeheartedly rather than, I don't know, not bearing witness or tempering things to make it more palatable to certain people. That to me is critical work.
It's profoundly hopeful, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, that I am sometimes labeled as something of a pessimist because I'm always finding fault with the way things are. And, this is something that happens not just in my academic work, but in my personal life. But the reason that I find the way things are problematic is that I really, really believe they could be better. Like it's an underlying optimism, not an underlying cynicism,
Yeah,
that makes
totally.
me critical.
Yeah, I think that's it as well. Because if we had no belief things could be better, I don't think we'd be doing this research either. You have to be driven by the idea that what you do could matter or could, you know, move the compass just even so slightly. So I agree with you. I think I take things very, very critically. Sometimes too black and white without understanding there are shades of grey or nuance, but always underlined by the idea that we can do better and accounting can look at things slightly differently. And that might take, decades or whatever, but it can change.
Yeah. I tend to be more patient with individuals than I am with systems, right? So when I'm talking to a person who is enmeshed in, the way things are, as say a politician or a CEO or another professor who studies things uncritically, I assume that they are people who are acting in good faith, right? And it's the system that's the problem. And that's not to say that there aren't people who do act in bad faith, but my focus is not those individuals. It's the way things are put together that interests me. But, prior to about 2016, we lived in a system where we believed that if we could somehow point out the truth about things, that it would help to improve things. And it was the election of Donald Trump the first time around that really was a punch to the gut for me. And it made me question what I was doing. Because if someone can be elected to the most powerful office in the world on the basis of complete lies and complete disregard for the truth, complete and utter disregard for the truth, then what's the point of doing research to find out what actually happens? Right? What's the point of being concerned about whether the evidence of an alternative voice has been suppressed in the accounting records, as is often the case when we're doing research on Indigenous topics. So if it doesn't matter what we're doing because the truth doesn't matter anymore, it becomes an extremely difficult job to do. And that's when I went through, something of a crisis of faith in what I was doing as an academic. And I started this podcast, as you know, as a way of trying to find out from other academics why they thought their work mattered, because I wasn't sure if mine mattered anymore. And it's been a very, very lovely experience talking to other academics. I'm not sure that I've got any closer to a definitive answer on whether academic research matters anymore. It certainly matters to some people, but does it matter in the world at all? And I think that's probably a good place to turn to this particular paper that you've written about, that has caught my eye. I will read the title of it. And I can't do parentheses when I'm talking. It's a very postmodern title with, parentheses around things. But it is called Revolting Rituals, Critical Accounting and the Honesty We Owe. Could you describe to me who you had in mind as an audience when you were writing this paper?
Sure. So, the audience is especially our discipline, so critical accounting, but actually more broadly as well, in academia, because I had a feeling that the things I was thinking were not, a critical accounting phenomenon. And, I did have other people outside of discipline read through the paper as well, and they said, this is exactly what's happening here. I feel so seen from having read that. So, but I guess, yeah, the initial audience was our critical accounting community. And it was supposed to be, I guess, a bit of a pushback against everything that we've seen. I know you said, 2016 was a real gut punch. I feel like it's daily knockouts with Trump at the moment, right? Like, it's certainly accelerated and escalated. What I wanted to do was call out some of that, but I also realized that lots of the things he's doing are not, again, just within his community. It's not just happening in America, and it's been happening in other countries for a long time. So I wanted to, I guess, focus in on us and what we could do to respond to, as you say, where truth doesn't matter anymore. What can we do? And that, for me, is the point at which we have to be really serious about the truth. So in a world where truth is contested, honesty becomes a special terrain, and we need to really hold on to that.
It's a radical act.
Yeah. The whole idea from this paper actually stemmed from attending a conference. And I don't know if you got that when you read it, that I was really upset with this conference because, we gather once a year, basically, in these big international ones. And we are there to talk about what's going on in the world. Yes, about our research and about ourselves, but ultimately, if what we want to do is make accounting a little bit better, then we should be using this as dialogue to do that. And what I saw instead was this almost practice politeness, this almost cult-like adherence to making sure that the bigger names were happy. And even at the start of the conference, we were told, we're not going to bring anything else into it, right? Whatever's happening out there is happening out there. Like at the start, and I was looking around like, for real? But that's what we do. Anyway, and there were lots and lots of different events. And I say in the paper, it feels like a fever dream, because that's what I thought I was in. I was looking around for others to be looking like me. Like, is this actually happening? Are they actually saying that? Are we witnessing this? Of which there were others. And I came home and I literally just sobbed because I was so disgusted and distraught at what had happened. And the other thing is, with the marketization of universities, I'd self-funded this trip. And that means sacrificing not only time, but money that my family could have spent elsewhere. And I just was so upset because it felt like such a waste of time and money. And I was thinking, the opportunity cost of where else that could have gone. And so the paper was really, I guess, almost a cathartic experience of trying to get out everything that I felt there, and then thinking, well, how can I channel this for something that actually does or potentially could make a difference, rather than, I don't know, just stewing in it and getting more and more angry. And how can we as scholars start to look differently at what we do and how we interact with each other, how we even, promote ourselves, so that it's not such a narcissistic display and it's more of a relational thing, right? Like, I want to talk to people. I want to hear their views. I don't care. Like, their metrics could be the same as them telling me about their shoe size. It's just, okay, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to bring back a little bit more of the humanity of our discipline, and to say, it's okay to push against other people. I have had an email from someone who didn't like the paper, and I was like, you should write about that. Put it out there then if there are things that you didn't like. Because like I said, this practice politeness is not, it's not critical. It's not what our community is
No.
about. And we are able to take that criticism, I think, and turn it into a healthy discussion rather than just make it almost like walls around the research that we do. Because to me, again, that's what critical accounting is about. It's about friction and being able to sit uncomfortably in spaces rather than have everything just be, I think I call it the Ouroboros in the paper, where we just are on this treadmill of publish, repeat, research, and stay on that treadmill rather than stopping and thinking about the research and other people.
Right. You and I share, quite obviously, a very emotional attachment to our research, or an emotional engagement with our research. I have always described my perspective as that of a middle child. My older sister was pretty and got to do things that I could never do because, she was 3 years older than me, and in high school, for instance, and I would be too young to do some of those things. And my younger brother is cute and sardonic and hilarious and could say things that I would get spanked for in that day and age, right? And he could get away with things. And I was stuck in the middle, kind of upset at the way things were. Everything seemed to be so unfair, right? So it's not that I'm motivated by a great sense of justice. It's a great sense of injustice, right? So when I see things that bother me about the way the world is, that's what I want to dig my intellectual tools into, to try to find some meaning in that.
Yes.
For me personally, it's the production of meaning as much as the production of change. Like, I think the production of meaning for me has to come first before I can begin to think about change. I have to understand who we are as a people and who I am as a person in this context. So this is, what pushes me to do my research. And you have described it, just as we were talking, you were describing this emotional reaction to this academic conference. So I appreciate your emotional honesty, but I wonder, how do you then see the role of the academy, of academia? Is it the ivory tower? And if it's the ivory tower, is that good or bad? Like, what is academia to you?
That's a good question. In answering, I guess, again, is a little bit informed by some of the work that I've done with Indigenous colleagues, where, it is an ivory tower and it's not safe. It is a very colonial space that perpetuates colonial violence, particularly onto people of color. And I don't think its turn to the managerialism is good in any sense of the word.
Right.
But I think at least the way modern universities are running in Australia is far too caught up in trying to run them as businesses and not being
This is what you
concerned.
mean by the turn to managerialism.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
they're not concerned with the production of knowledge, actually. I remember going to a meeting, a town hall, actually, and they told us, here are our 5 pillars. Pillar 1, research and teaching. And I don't know what the other 4 were, but I thought, if that's pillar 1, the other 4 aren't really that important, actually. Like, they obviously are to management and the executive, and to bundle
Yes.
them into one as
Yes.
well was,
Yes. Well,
I
yes,
mean, yeah,
exactly. But,
emblematic, right?
saying that research and teaching are only 1/5 of our priorities is saying the quiet part out loud, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we need to go back to that, to the idea that universities are not producing things, like tangible things. So another thing that on my first day, I went to a thing and they're like, our clients want this. Saying, who are our clients? And a bit later, then referred to them as students. I was like, oh, this
It's
is not what I signed
copy
up
and
for.
paste from a corporate PowerPoint slide.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And if that is the case, then the product is the degree, right? And to me, I think there has been a change that I'm seeing in the students coming through in the last couple of years. They are less seeing it as they're a client who deserve a product. And, I've even been told, you work for me. I'm like,
Mm.
not quite. And they are starting to get back more into the knowledge. I don't know how AI is going to interact with that, but I've definitely seen a lot more interaction, interest, like they are genuinely showing up and wanting to learn versus getting an outcome and then moving on from that. As much as the university, I don't think is helping with that. I think they help put forward that pipeline, but I would just love to see a return to more knowledge, really centering knowledge production, be that in research and teaching, and getting back to some of the core functions. I don't know how to do that. It might be too late. It might have been corporatized beyond bringing back.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of it will come down to good leaders and leaders who are going to center that. And I
Hmm.
haven't seen that for a while. So
Hmm.
I don't know what's the experience like it in Canada.
Um, Extremely managerial.
Yeah, so very similar.
Yeah, very,
Yeah.
very similar. Um, of the things you've just said, the thing that stands out to me the most that I need to be honest about is that for me, the academic space is extremely safe. I am a white male
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
have tenure. I'm a full professor. I am in this almost unassailable position.
Yeah.
And that is something that I take very seriously. Like, how can I use this position to do something that matters?
Hmm.
And for
Yeah.
me, the most important thing is to recognize that my contact with students is the most direct platform that I have for my research and to
Hmm.
integrate my research and my teaching together. And you talked about those, facetiously as being combined in one priority for the university. But for me, it's the integration of research and teaching that has made teaching more meaningful to me, right?
Hmm.
That I'm not trying to hide who I am as a researcher and just teach the textbook.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to give students a sense of how I see the world, not so that they can think like me, but so that they can see that there are different ways of looking at this material and they can pick and choose a perspective for themselves that works for them. And I encourage them to do that. I encourage them deliberately to, you know, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. This is my perspective. It's just me, but I'm not going to hide it from you. But I want you to make up your own mind about how you think about the role of accounting in the world and the
Yeah.
importance of this stuff, because your situation as students is so extremely different from mine when I was a student,
Hmm.
right? Your relationship between yourself and what you're learning and your future is dramatically different from what it was for me. I know that you're getting into a lot of debt in order to take
Yeah.
this course,
Yeah. Hmm.
and your job prospects are pretty bleak compared to what they were like when I was growing up and going through university.
Hmm.
So I don't expect students to see the world as I do, but I want them to see that I do see the world.
Yeah.
And it's a specific perspective that I want to share with them so that they can understand that seeing the world from your perspective is important, to recognize what's going on when you're seeing the world. That is not, you're not just seeing the truth about the world, you are seeing the world from a perspective. And that helps to develop some reflexivity
Hmm.
in all of us. So, to go back to this emotional reaction to this conference, in your paper you refer to a decontextualized keynote speech. So
Hmm.
I won't ask which speaker you're talking about, but we've all heard them, right?
Yes.
They're very nice, very helpful kinds of presentations that give us a sense of perspective on what we're doing. But to say that we're going to set aside the way the world is right now in order that we can just enjoy this conference
Hmm.
is, I think, very much to misunderstand our role as academics. We need to be writing from that place of an emotional reaction to the world.
Yes. And I think, sometimes we're not always able to do that within the academy. So to me, a conference is a place where we can do that, right?
Hmm.
So, you said that you are quite safe in that space. In lots of ways, I'm safe too. In others, maybe not so much. But conferences are supposed to be, a community gathering around us where we can say what we like or what we need to say and have those discussions that, like I said, in the corridors, I can't have because people aren't even sure that my work is a thing or that they can talk to me about things because they think I'm just going to spout numbers at them.
Yeah.
So I think the idea that, we have these outlets for that and we're not using them in that way
Yes.
was just really, and that hasn't been my experience. This was probably one of the first times where it's felt very jarring like that,
Hmm.
and probably at one of the most politically and socially escalated contexts that I've had to live through. So it was just very weird that we would be living through that, have this space, and then almost be told not to talk about it, and then to have that play out where it isn't talked about.
Hmm.
To have keynotes that were primarily more about how great they were versus stuff that matters, like that I could learn
Hmm.
from. Or, and again, not always my experience. I've had keynotes in the past who have been brilliant and have absolutely extended my thinking. I'll say at this point too. So I went to a different conference as well, and this one I actually take my daughter to.
Hmm.
They're 10, and they're able to engage with the keynotes, which I think is great. I mean, there's some they can't. Maybe you should take your granddaughters to a conference, Cam, because after my presentations, I get a little list of who was on their phone or who was checking their email, which is great. But I think that's another way that I think the academy can expand. So, it wasn't that long ago where these were spaces that women couldn't occupy, right?
Yes.
And I think it's again a very colonial or patriarchal, whichever persuasion, to keep children out of these spaces too.
Hmm.
And for me, it's a very deliberate act of bringing my child in there because A, I think children belong everywhere. And also B, because, it's so nice to see them in that space interacting with these
Hmm.
ideas. Like we shouldn't wait until we get to, third year university or second year to start discussing things. What I really like is, now they're talking about the conference that's coming up again, and they're saying, I can't wait to see Jane and Fazana and your friends are just like me and my friends. Like I just think it's so nice to include
Hmm.
people in spaces where traditionally, especially in the academy, actually, they would be barred from because of, I don't know, archaic rules or whatever else, or they're just not seen as being that important to that
Hmm.
particular ecosystem. But, my child might be a future academic, might be a future student. And I just think it's good to make those spaces more open and safe in any way that we can.
Hmm. So it's on behalf of your child that you are pushing this boulder up the hill, right? This is
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
the metaphor that is at the heart of your paper. You're using the myth of Sisyphus
Hmm.
to describe this critical accounting task that we push
Hmm.
the boulder up the hill and it rolls back on us every time Trump gets elected.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Um, so what comes out of this, though, is not despair. It's a different kind of an understanding of what it is that we are trying to accomplish. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I read a paper where they used this metaphor, and it for me just clicked immediately. I'm like, I feel like Sisyphus, so I wanted to use it in that way. And what I found really interesting about using, Camus' idea of this and all of his other ideas about how to actually push back on that boulder and all of that was the notion that, I might complain about the boulder, but I chose it as
Mm-hmm.
well. Like Sisyphus didn't. Sisyphus is the ultimate metaphor of futility. And yes, there are certain elements that are futile, but because we chose it, I think we can also choose to see meaning in pushing it, which is why, the last section I talk about how I learned to love the boulder,
Mm-hmm.
which, may also sound like Stockholm syndrome. I don't know. But it was mainly because I was thinking about how, even though all of this angers me and upsets me, I am still excited every day to do my work. I love what I research, I love who I work with. And for me, there is meaning in what I'm doing. Sometimes it creates a crack. So, for instance, I did have some aged care advocates reach out to me for a paper I did about financial gaslighting and the financialization of elder care. And they said, no one's talking about this, and we were so happy that it's getting seen in academia. And I was invited to speak at a workshop, and the other speakers were CEOs in community care, um, aged care or healthcare experts. So it was great that there was able to be, I guess, an accounting person in that to also learn from them as well. For me, you never know what's going to gain traction, what might just create just a slight, might allow the light to get in to
Mm-hmm.
that crack. And for me, the meaning is found by, to use the metaphor, looking around the mountain and seeing the other people pushing their boulders. And so their tenacity, I guess, inspires me as well. And, we all have moments where we think what we're doing is futile, where we sob and we get, distraught or disgusted by either the state of the world or the state of the place in which we work. But ultimately, I think we do what we do because we care so deeply about certain things, and we want others to witness that care. The way that we care is by writing, journal articles. But, and this, I guess, goes back to that idea of, we're in a post-truth era, is that I and maybe it also stems from my work on the Holocaust, but I desperately want to make sure that what is happening is being witnessed by somebody. Why not me? I'm probably not the best person for it, but at least I am doing it and I am willing to do it. And, as you say, accounting leaves records. Well, so does our research. And I also talk in the paper about people whose work didn't, make much of a splash at the time, which university administrators would say, you failed your KPIs, you're out, but whose work has gone on to have tremendous value in terms of the way we look at things, the way we understand things. So the idea, I guess, is that I might not be able to meet every university metric or the idea of impact, but I can do what feels meaningful for me and that I believe in, and I can, I guess, leave some sort of mark on scholarship. And as I said, the person who commented, I didn't agree with your paper. Well, great. Now we've got an example of work going back and forth, at least. Like, that's a knowledge production. That to me is a crack, because it's not just me
Mm-hmm.
performing the Ouroboros where, everyone in the circle reads it, moves on. Like, someone has stopped and they've gone, hang on, I don't agree with that, like,
Yeah.
so that
Well, I
friction's
mean,
great.
hopefully they cite it before they move on. That's
Yeah.
You use the word revolt in this paper, and you talked a moment ago about learning to love the boulder, right? Coming to terms with the fact that this is the human condition that we're
Mm.
involved in. But in what sense is that a revolt to almost embrace that futility?
Well, for me, I don't think the revolt is embracing the futility. I
Okay.
think the revolt is continuing to do the work while not performing for certain interests or metrics. So for me, metrics are important. They're part of why I get to keep my job, but I don't have to make that the reason why I do things. I don't have to make that my identity. I can have that in the back of my mind as something that I have to achieve because, otherwise I can't afford the mortgage or whatever else. But I can also achieve that doing what is important to me over here. So for me, the revolt is doing critical work, actually, stuff that I have to explain, stuff that isn't just self evident in terms of what most executives or managers would look at and go, yeah, okay, I see value in this. And pushing that boulder anyway, refusing to look at quantitative stuff because I'm interested in
Mm-hmm.
people and that's qualitative, and to go with my own research agenda, to work with people I want to work with, not necessarily people who, have a lot of citations or can bring me up through leveraging who they are, but through the work they do and also who they are as people. So my collaborations are so beautiful because we always make space for each other. There's no apologies, there's no need to explain yourself. Everything is just accepted. And I think that's so important, and I trust them. So I guess the revolt for me is just little things, and they may not even outwardly be visible, but they're just, for me, how I frame things and how I frame my work and myself is just pushing back against those things that are constantly trying to push me to be a certain thing. And I can still be me over here and have that be part of my identity, but not my full identity.
I imagine that this becomes quite easy to teach to students when you phrase it like that, because students tend to see themselves in the marks that they get, right? That metric of themselves. So how do you talk to students about the work that you're doing?
I teach advanced financial accounting and taxation. They're very, very technical subjects. They don't leave a lot of space for exploring other perspectives because, I assume it's something similar in Canada, but the professional bodies are quite strict on what we need to teach and the curriculum's quite crowded. But I do try to push things in. So, my advanced financial accounting, I talk about the context in which accounting is created, and I do talk about some of my research there, particularly Holocaust things, so to make them, I guess, think twice when they look at a balance sheet at maybe what it's hiding or what sort of human suffering has been incurred. And then for tax, what I've tried to do, so we started a tax clinic last year, and the tax clinic is run by the students, so overseen by a professional tax agent, and the only clients they see are those with particular vulnerabilities. So they may be victim survivors, they may be Indigenous, they may have precarious migration status. And so the students who are used to, even the ones who are out in practice, used to doing, work experience or case studies that are about particular types of clients, actually get to interface with people who are facing challenges. And what they actually come to learn through doing that is it's not an individual failing when people don't file taxes or are confused, that there are systematic problems. So for me, I love that because I haven't told them that. They have learnt that through interacting with people, and they're going to remember that. And a lot of them have come away and said, either I want to continue doing like pro bono work like this to help people, or it's really made me rethink how I talk to people about things, and that I actually need to, it's more like 90% relational and 10% explaining the technical things and just making people feel safe and like they belong, which is something that I really try to cultivate in my classrooms, that idea of belonging no matter your identity. So the way I've tried to do it is practically, and also just wherever I can kind of slot things in. But I still think there's a lot I could do to make them more aware of critical things. But I'm also, I talk about it in class a lot because, as I say, I bring my whole self. And I have gotten, evaluations in the past where they've said, you really need to tamp down on the political stuff, especially some of us are more conservative, which I've kind of looked at and gone, yeah, I could do that, but I'm not gonna. Like, I can't not be political
Yeah.
in the classroom.
Yeah.
Because I not being political is the ultimate political act, right? I think.
Not being political is a position of privilege because it means that the system's working fine for you.
Yes, yeah. And I don't ascribe to that, and it would be inauthentic to approach it any other way. And I do really try to come into teaching as me, and because I'm trying to get them to come to me as who they are as well. And I always try to preface that, I'm like, you're not an accounting student here with me. You're all those things that I said at the start. You might have all these different identities that you're constantly negotiating, and I want you to bring that, and I want you to feel like who you are as a student is this part of who you are and what I care about, and you as a person is actually who I'm here to teach and to learn from as well.
I want to thank you for talking to me about this paper. It is something that resonates really strongly with me because for years now, within the critical accounting community that you and I are a part of, we have struggled with what it means to be critical. And there's been some very good pieces written about what this means. Like what
Yes.
do we mean by the word critical even, let alone the word accounting or research, right? And your paper is something that ties into those previous efforts by people like Yves Gendron, and yet it tugs at this emotional thread. Is that a mixed metaphor? That is,
I've got so many in there.
this emotional chord for me, that it just resonates with where I am at still, as an academic, trying to understand what it is that I really do. Right? So thank you so much for describing what we do in this new way. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I'm so glad that it did resonate. And you know what? It's nice to put something out there and to, literally see the other people pushing the boulders, right? Like you've reached out, there's been a couple of others who have reached out and had positive things, which, I don't know, it might happen to you, but I never get any feedback on papers once they're published.
No,
So
they disappear into the void.
Totally. So to have somebody say they disagree, great. Like you engaged. But to have
You
people
read
say,
it.
yeah. But to have people who say, I feel less isolated, or, you captured how I feel as well, is wonderful. I mean, not great because I'm talking about lots of hard things that are
Yeah,
hard to reconcile, but, we aren't alone in our struggle. Lots of
right.
academia is very isolating, but, there are others on the mountain, and as I say, we need to tap into that community, and we need to form that solidarity that we once had, even if it does at times make us uncomfortable, because our community ultimately will be there for us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cam. Great to talk to you.